The hearing room was less a chamber of government and more a stage prepared for fate. White lights blazed against polished wood, bouncing off marble as if the building itself wanted to ensure nothing. No gesture, no glance, no tremor of a lip escaped the cameras that stared relentlessly from every angle. Red tally lights glowed like embers, transmitting this moment live to millions of living rooms, bars, classrooms, and quiet kitchens across the country. America was watching, and America was leaning forward. At the center of that electric space sat Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett. Young, steady, shoulders squared, she looked as if the storm overhead had already broken inside her and left her unshakable. Her silence was not hesitation. It was deliberate, loud enough to be heard in every pause. The papers before her were neat, but her eyes never dipped to them. They stayed level, dark and unflinching, fixed on the woman sitting across the table. That woman was Melania Trump. She reclined with practiced elegance, a smirk tugging at her mouth like she knew this performance already belonged to her. She had draped arrogance across her shoulders like a tailored gown. Nothing in her posture betrayed nerves. Instead, every flick of her hand, every arch of her brow carried the smug ease of someone convinced by power, that she had the upper hand, that she could wound with words and walk away untouchable. For weeks, she had mocked Jasmine's mother. She had repeated the same cruel refrain until reporters parroted it in headlines, until it burned in kitchens and offices like acid. She was only a cleaner. 3 words, lobbed like stones across generations, as if decades of labor, sweat, and dignity could be reduced to dust. The insult was not merely at a woman, but at the very notion that ordinary hands matter. But today, those words were no longer passing sound bites. They were on us, der trial. The rush of spectators seemed to know it too. The air itself trembled with the weight of anticipation, as if everyone present realized that this was not another congressional hearing filled with noise and half-truths. It felt sharper, charged, like the charged breath before lightning finds the ground. The insult had become evidence, and now dignity itself would square off against disdain. The silence cracked open when Melania leaned forward. She did not raise her voice. She didn't need to. With languid precision, her words slid into the microphone like a blade. Washington has hundreds of cleaning staff. No one remembers their names. Miss Crockett's mother is just one of them. The words fell heavy into the room, stone after stone sinking into still water. Ripples crossed the chamber, striking deeper with every syllable. But it wasn't just the words. The finishing touch was what followed. A dry, mocking laugh. Not loud, but poisoned, curling at the edge. A chuckle too cruel to disguise. It slithered against the marble walls, a sound so out of place it made the air itself recoil. The chamber froze. Reporters raised their heads mid-sentence, pens dangling useless. Senators shifted uneasily, some exchanging sharp glances, others staring ahead with predatory curiosity. The cameras drank in the smirk and the laugh, their tally lights flashing, hungry to beam it into history. And in that instant, before Jasmine even moved, it was clear. This was no longer politics. It was war. The laugh still lingered in the chamber air like smoke after a spark. It wasn't loud, but it was enough. Dry, brittle, sharpened at the edges. It crawled up the walls, settled into the marble, and hung above the audience like a sneer carved into stone. Everyone felt it. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Even the air seemed embarrassed to carry the sound. Reporters froze with pens suspended mid-stroke, their notepads useless for once because what had just happened didn't need translation. It needed witnesses. A senator cleared his throat, too loud in the stillness, as though the sound might steady the room. Another leaned toward an aide, whispering without moving his lips, eyes never leaving Melania. Behind the dais, staffers shifted in chairs with small jerks and nervous coughs, not wanting their discomfort to make the broadcast. The cameras zoomed tighter. Red tally lights blinked steady, catching Melania's lip twitch as if to confirm it was real. Somewhere deep in the country, in kitchens and living rooms, families drew closer to screens. It was the kind of moment you didn't want to blink through. The insult had already been ugly. The laugh, that laugh had made it exhibition. Jasmine Crockett did not whisper to an aide. She did not reach for her folder. She did not glance around the room for approval. Instead, she rose. It wasn't swift. It wasn't explosive. It was deliberate, slow, commanding in the way a sunrise pushes darkness away just by showing up. The scrape of her chair against the floor was louder than a drumbeat. The sound sliced the silence. Instinctively, every neck in the gallery swiveled, every lens tilted. The spotlight seemed to crawl over to her without being asked. She placed one hand flat on the folder before her, a thick, weathered file creased by years of preparation and quiet battle. Her other hand steadied on the desk. She stood fully upright, breathing slow and deep, shoulders squared against the storm of lights and stares. Her eyes found Melania's, steady, locking like iron tines. For the first time that morning, the smirk across the table faltered, just briefly, but enough to shiver through the room. That once confident curl seemed to wilt, no longer framed by arrogance, but by the faintest crack of doubt. Jasmine did not shout. Her voice, when it came, moved through the chamber like a bell rung once, clear and undeniable. "Mrs. Trump, let me remind you about what you call nameless." The words didn't need speed. They carried with weight. They landed with the finality of nails driven into wood. Gasps prickled through the hushed audience. A low murmur rippled, growing and then breaking apart again, as she lifted her chin toward the giant black screen mounted at the chamber's back wall. She gave a subtle nod, so small only a few would have noticed. But on that signal, a staffer's fingers flew across a panel, and an electronic hum rose sharp and cold. The blank screen came alive. White glare bled outward, making eyes squint. Then it steadied. The outlines of an image took shape. The anticipation in the chamber became unbearable. People leaned forward, hands halfway to their mouths, as if they already sensed what was coming wasn't evidence. It was revelation. The laugh still echoed in memory, sour and unrepented. But already the tables were turning. Jasmine's silence, her rise, her single sentence had begun something irresistible. At that moment, the insult was no longer a wound. It had been converted. Elevating, electric, it was now poised to return as the sharpest weapon in the room. Evidence. The chamber lights dimmed slightly as the massive screen behind the dais awakened. A sudden hush settled, the kind that tightens throats and slows the breath before fireworks explode. First came the flicker. Grainy shadows, blurred shapes teased across the white glow. For half a second it was only noise, an undecided image. And then, like the slide of a heavy lock, the picture came into focus. A collective gasp burst from the room. It was black and white, yet impossibly alive. The American flag loomed enormous, its fabric rippling against an unrelenting bicentennial wind, July 4, 1976. The stripes lashed like a storm-tossed sea, a living thing trying to break free. But tethered to the earth, holding it back from collapse into the dirt, stood a line of women. They were not soldiers, not celebrated dignitaries with medals pinned to their chests. They were working women, black women, shoulders set, backs taut, legs braced like living anchors. Each gripped the thick ropes that held the flag from toppling under the assault of summer winds. Their faces were etched with strain, determination carved into every line of muscle. And there, unmistakable in the very center, was Sarah Crockett. The camera lenses crept closer, instinctively zooming in to magnify her figure, frozen in the eternal grip of effort. Sweat glistened on her brow even through monochrome. Both hands clamped around the rope, veins raised, knuckles white. She leaned forward, chin down, thighs planted wide as though even the strongest gust could not pry her stance apart. Beside her, others strained, but Sarah was the hinge, the center of gravity, the unshakable core. The flag ballooned behind her, vast and high, billowing so violently it looked capable of swallowing the crowd gathered that day. And still she held it. Her body, the keystone of that moment, the axle around which the entire symbol of America jarred, remained upright. The audience inside the hearing chamber could hardly breathe. Murmurs crashed against silence. A few spectators whispered names, but most simply gaped, knowing at once that they were looking at something impossible to trivialize. The photograph did not just show labor. It revealed sacrifice. It revealed dignity. It revealed the truth that the woman mocked as only a cleaner had, at one of the nation's proudest public festivals, been the one who refused to let America's flag collapse. Literally, symbolically, entirely. A senator dropped his pen. It clattered against the desk like thunder, and no one dared pick it up. From the gallery came a shocked exclamation, "Oh my God!" Reporters' cameras fired in frantic bursts, the room flashing white as the image was captured again and again, already immortalized but demanded afresh. At the witness table, Melania Trump's smirk froze. No clever poise remained to shield her. Her eyes flitted between the floor, the desk, the corners of the chamber, anywhere the photograph wasn't. But it filled the room, immense, undeniable. It felt as if the flag itself was staring back from the screen. Jasmine Crockett's voice cut into the paralysis. Low, steady, mercilessly calm. "This is the woman you mocked." The words weren't a roar. They didn't need to be. They rang clean, a verdict disguised as fact, and settled into the chamber like the sharp edge of history itself. In that instant, the game was over. Melania's insult had collapsed under the sheer weight of evidence. One photograph had upended arrogance, and the once dismissed name was no longer nameless. Sarah Crockett had entered the record. The image of Sarah Crockett still glowed across the chamber wall, bright and immovable, commanding more reverence than any living official in the room. For a moment, silence reigned. A silence thick enough to hum in the ears. The silence people feel on battlefields or in sanctuaries when something greater than individuals has arrived. Then came the sound. Not chaos, not yet. It was whispers, gasps swelling into murmurs, the kind that roll low at first like the rumble of a storm on the horizon. Senators leaned forward, squinting to make sure their eyes weren't playing tricks. Reporters fired cameras in rhythmic lightning, each flash bouncing off marble and wood. The clicking grew frenzied, like hail pelting against glass, as if everyone was terrified that if the bulbs stopped, the truth might vanish. A congressman blurted out barely above a breath, "Oh my God!" The exclamation seemed to pierce the hush like a pin through solemn fabric. Another fumbled his pen. It clattered to the floor, the metallic ring echoing in that over-tense quiet longer than it should have. The photograph was not just evidence. It was revelation. In one glance, it rewrote the insult. Only a cleaner had become the one who held the flag against the storm. Arrogance shrank. Dignity towered. Melania Trump's face betrayed what her words could not hide. Her frozen smile dried on her lips, stiff as cracked plaster, until it collapsed altogether. The poise once painted carefully into her features melted under the hot white lights. Her eyes flickered frantically like moths searching for an exit. To the screen, away from it, toward Jasmine, away from Jasmine, toward the ceiling, anywhere but center, anywhere but truth. Her hands twitched against the table, restless, agitated. She tried to smooth the skirt fabric on her lap, but her fingers curled instead, clutching themselves as if caught by their own betrayal. And all the while, Sarah Crockett stood behind her, immortal and steady in black and white, knuckles gripping rope, body squared against wind, ready to spill strength forever into the nation's bloodstream. Jasmine Crockett stepped closer to the mic, her voice dropping into that dangerous, deliberate calm, every syllable shaped not for volume, but for permanence. "The woman you insulted raised the American flag on the nation's most important day. She is not a nameless person. She is America's heritage." The words thudded into the silence like iron weights dropped onto stone. No one dared to fill the pause. No commentator on television could compete. No senator had a quip sharp enough. In that moment, the phrase was its own gavel, its own verdict. Across the country, living rooms leaned forward together. Some viewers whispered the words aloud in sync, like a collective echo traveling across states. Others sat stunned, clutching remotes they dared not click. Melania shifted in her chair, a breath forced between clenched teeth. Arrogance had evaporated, leaving behind only pale retreat. The sneer, the laugh, the dismissal, the mask she had worn into the room was unraveling live under the focus of every lens that America could aim at her. Truth doesn't need fire when it has clarity. And in that chamber, clarity itself became flame. What once seemed like power was now cornered, and the arrogance that had filled the room just moments before, it burned away in the white heat of a single photograph. The photograph still burned bright, etched into every gaze, but Melania, cornered, finally drew in a shallow breath and forced sound into the microphone. Her voice reached for confidence, but the edges trembled, thin as paper torn halfway through. "A photograph?" she said, her lips curling over polished words. "Anyone can fake one. It proves nothing." The sentence did not echo with authority. It scuttled like a loose coin dropped against stone. For a second it clanged, but then rolled hollow, gathering no weight. Her attempt at dismissal slid across the polished table and died there, unwanted. She tried to sit taller, as though lengthening her spine could steady her words, but her eyes betrayed her, darting upward to the ceiling, outward to the chamber doors, then sliding back to the desk's reflection as though escape might be hidden in the gloss of wood grain. The arrogance of power, her reliable shield, was slipping, thin and flimsy against the sharp truth on display. The audience felt it. The gallery went graveyard silent again, that peculiar kind of silence you feel in theaters when the villain's mask begins slipping. Spectators sensed vulnerability in the faltering tone. Even the cameras seemed to lean in closer, the red tally lights hungry to devour the moment now unraveling in real time. Then came the chair's crisp, even voice. "We need authenticated evidence." It wasn't dramatic, it was procedural, but it landed like a latch clicking shut. The chamber reoriented itself. Outrage gave way to formality. The temperature of the moment shifted from fire to steel. It was no longer spectacle, it was record. Jasmine Crockett rose again, noiseless this time, her posture straight as a drawn blade. She didn't need fire or fury. She had brought something stronger, truth with a seal. "Mrs. Trump," she said, her words cut lean, honed for permanence. "You want evidence." The chamber seemed to exhale as her words carried through, not fiery, but locked in iron authority. The hush that followed felt like the final tightening of a knot. There would be no escape through laughter, no refuge in dismissal. The insult had been obliterated, not by opinion, but by history itself. The chamber was already taut with history, the truth pressed onto the wall in black and white permanence. Sarah Crockett's name gleamed official in the record, and her photograph hung behind Jasmine like a banner of fact. Melania sat pale, lips tightened, her earlier bravado dissolved like cheap ink against water. And yet Jasmine was not finished. She stood again, calm in her movements, her eyes steady on the enormous image of her mother wrangling the flag. Her hand lifted, a simple gesture, but deliberate, not a wave, not for applause, but a signal. The staffer by the wall bent toward the control board. Fingers tapped, switches clicked, and the giant chamber screen blinked into motion. The image flickered once. Sarah Crockett still holding the rope, frozen in the bicentennial storm. But then the light fractured, dividing the colossal display into two frames, side by side, past and present. On the left, the photograph from 1976. Sarah Crockett, jaw tight, arms straining forward, body braced to keep the American flag from crashing to the ground. Her strength was etched into her stance, grit recorded forever in grainy monochrome. She held because if she let go, the symbol of her nation itself would collapse before its people. On the right, a video clip bloomed in color. The year, 2018. The setting, a public ceremony, cameras rolling, the star-spangled banner filling the air. And there was Melania Trump, not braced, not reverent, not steady, leaning toward an aide with an irrepressible giggle wrinkling her face, laughter spilling as the anthem thundered and the flag rose. The juxtaposition was savage, sacrifice versus mockery, strength versus indifference. A woman of labor fighting wind to keep the flag upright against another woman of privilege laughing as ceremony carried the flag skyward. The chamber reacted instantly. A gasp rippled sharp across rows of seats, a collective intake of breath that smashed into the marble ceiling and came tumbling down louder than applause. A few aides jolted half to their feet, as if instinct demanded escape from embarrassment that had nowhere to run. Reporters' fingers battered laptops, keys firing like gunshots. Television producers whispered rapid commands. "Split screen, Tight shot. Hold, hold. No commentator was required. The images spoke louder than 10,000 words. Jasmine let the contrast breathe. She did not interrupt. She let the silence fill with the sound of hypocrisy revealing itself. Only when the gasps swelled into an audible storm did she lean forward into her microphone. Her tone was not angry. It was clean, surgical, precise. One woman held the flag so it would never fall. The other laughed while the anthem played and the flag rose. Which one do you call nameless? The sentence, though framed as a question, carried no question mark. It was a verdict. For a heartbeat, the silence returned. Then the chamber cracked open in chaos. Cries of "Shame!" tangled with applause, gasps collided with furious shouts, and the gavel slammed against wood, futile against the roar. Some senators smacked their desks with flat palms, others shook their heads, faces drained. The room, and the nation behind the cameras, was aflame in the realization of a contrast impossible to unsee. And across the table, Melania Trump flinched. The color drained, her lips parted. She opened her mouth, scrambling for defense, but no steady sound would come. The photograph demanded nothing. The video excused not. Hing. Together, they had written the truth plainly on the wall. Hypocrisy had found its mirror, and in its reflection, arrogance crumbled. The twin images burned on the screen. Left, Sarah Crockett steadying a nation's flag against a raging bicentennial wind. Right, Melania Trump mid-giggle at a flag-raising ceremony in 2018. The comparison was brutal in its simplicity, a truth so blunt it scarcely needed explanation. Melania reeled backward as if struck. Her lips parted. A few broken syllables stuttered into the microphone. That video, it was taken out of context. But the chamber didn't buy it. The chamber didn't even hear it. The words drowned beneath the storm of human reaction. The gallery exploded. Gasps clashed with shouts, disbelief collided with fury, and applause tangled into boos until the noise became a maelstrom no gavel could silence. Senators gripped their desks with white knuckles. Some muttered openly, "Un-American," louder than the microphones wanted them to. Reporters hammered at keyboards in frantic waves, their screens filling with headlines in real time. The sound swallowed Melania's excuse whole. Her eyes flickered desperately toward her attorney, lips moving in soundless pleading. But no rope was there, no hand stretched across the divide. She reached for her glass of water, fingers trembling. When she lifted it, her hand betrayed her again. Liquid spilled past the rim, dribbling down the side and pooling across the glossy desk. A dark stain spread slowly outward, like a map of her own retreat. The cameras caught every second. Sweat gleamed at her hairline, traveling in lonely streaks through layers of foundation once flawless. Her mouth formed half-protests that died as soon as they tasted air. The audience was merciless. They did not look at her. They looked at the screen. They looked at Sarah Crockett bracing against wind, saving the flag from collapse. And then they looked back at the video replaying across from it. The laugh. That unforgiving moment of levity at the anthem's solemn duty. The contrast struck hammer against anvil until no one in the chamber could mistake it. And Jasmine Crockett? She did not gloat. She did not lean for the cameras. She remained still, letting truth devour arrogance without her lifting a finger. Only at the height of the storm did she bend toward her microphone, her tone quieter than the uproar but sharper than every sound in the room. Each syllable was cold steel. The mother you mocked held America high. You, Mrs. Trump, mocked America itself. Her words cracked down like the swing of a gavel. The noise vanished. Silence, sudden and suffocating, filled the chamber again. But this silence was different from the earlier pauses. This was not anticipation. This was aftermath. It was the silence of recognition, the silence that comes when guilt is laid bare and no further sentence is needed. The chamber knew it. The gallery knew it. The nation knew it. Two images still glowed side by side, searing themselves into collective memory. One, a legacy of labor. The other, a stain of ridicule. And between them stood Jasmine's verdict, final as iron. Arrogance had been stripped. All that remained was collapse, and the cameras did not blink. The gavel cracked 3 times. fierce and futile, but the sound barely touched the roar inside the hearing room. The storm of voices was no longer just politics. It was catharsis. Applause collided with shouts. Thunder rolled through marble and wood, and the chair's stern, "Order, order," was swallowed whole. But this story was already escaping the chamber. The moment the photograph flashed across that screen, history's grip outmuscled spectacle. Reporters flooded hallways at a sprint, phones pressed to ears, frantic with headlines being drafted in mid-stride. Wire services lit up red, notifications pinged across every device. Newsrooms crackled alive like switchboards in a storm. Producers shouted over each other, editors smacked desks, and printers chattered with the hungry clatter of presses devouring paper. Within minutes, images of Sarah Crockett's hands gripping the rope shot across television screens and filled homepages. And above the fold, stark in heavy type, one sentence repeated, "The unknown woman who held the American flag." The headline didn't negotiate. It tolled like a bell. By sundown, the photograph was everywhere, beamed across airports, splashed across evening newscasts, taped to makeshift posters, scrolling endlessly across feeds. Anchors spoke in quieter voices than usual, as if entering sacred ground. They described the photograph plainly, without embellishment. How the flag ballooned like a living storm. How the line of women leaned hard against its ropes. How in the very middle stood Sarah Crockett, her grip the one thing that kept America's banner from falling. And then the anchors fell silent. Because the picture didn't need commentary, it needed witnesses. Households across the country leaned closer to their televisions. A retired machinist in Detroit mouthed, "I remember that parade." A grandmother in Phoenix pulled a dusty VHS from this shelf and watched it flicker with neighbors huddled tight. In Baton Rouge, a veteran stared at the image and whispered the years of his own service under the same flag. In senior centers, in diners, in backyards with folding chairs, the photograph unlocked memories so long sealed people wept before they realized why. What the hearing released wasn't outrage, it was recognition. It spread into schools overnight. By morning, superintendents had slipped instructions into teachers' inboxes. Make room for this. History teachers dimmed lights and pulled the image across whiteboards as though introducing a guest speaker. There was a hush teenagers rarely gave to anything without a screen or a beat. "What do you see first?" one teacher in Ohio asked. A girl near the window whispered, "Her hands." A boy added quietly, "The wind." Both answers were true. In Harlem, a civics teacher wrote one prompt on the board. "Who do we thank when things don't go wrong?" No one laughed, because everyone understood. Meanwhile, opinion writers set aside partisanship in an unspoken truce. Columns printed with rare sincerity. Editorial boards found common language. This is less a scandal than a correction. Television panels, usually hungry to bicker over scraps, sat unusually quiet, letting the camera simply rest on the photo, as though commentary would only shrink it. And across comment sections, across living rooms, across city councils, it was repeated with reverence. Jasmine Crockett is the one who revived the nation's memory. Her mother is the one who kept it standing. From a single chamber, the story had burst into 1,000 streets. What began as insult had been transformed into inheritance. The nation was no longer watching a hearing. It was watching itself. The photograph had already conquered front pages, classrooms, and living rooms, but by the second week, it no longer belonged to the news cycle. It had slipped into something deeper: ritual, memory, movement. Historians were the first to sense the shift. University archivists and city clerks met on frantic calls, each realizing the same truth at once. This story was bigger than one photograph. Sarah Crockett hadn't stood alone. She had stood among a line of women, hands burning in the same rope, names that had been allowed to fade. So the initiative was born, announced quietly but firmly: Hidden Hands of America. Its mission was not grandiose. It was practical. Find the names, gather the proof, correct the record. Pop-up scanning stations appeared in libraries and union halls. White-gloved grad students welcomed elders carrying shoeboxes stuffed with ledgers, pay stubs, work badges, handwritten schedules. Oral history booths hummed softly. 30-minute interviews captured one voice at a time. Volunteers staffed hotlines, patient in their guidance to those who trembled over fragile relics of labor. The rule was simple: no myths, only material. Ordinary evidence that proved ordinary people hold up extraordinary things. The submissions flowed in like steady weather. A Baltimore woman laid down her father's heavy tool belt, still clinking faintly with screws left untouched since 1976. In Atlanta, a grandson offered his grandmother's coffee-stained apron from years spent serving lawmakers meals no one remembered but everyone depended on. In Detroit, another unfolded a brass luggage tag worn smooth by a Pullman porter who memorized timetables so others could sleep. Each piece landed less like a relic and more like a reminder. America is carried constantly in unnoticed hands. The project reached Congress too, faster than cynics thought possible. A resolution was drafted, plainly, without ceremonial bloat, to recognize the bicentennial flag detail of 1976 and all hidden hands of American labor. Lawmakers from both parties stepped behind it, not out of politics, but out of respect too raw to avoid. The promised act was simple. Every name connected to that detail would be read into the record, slowly, deliberately, so the congressional record would carry them as firmly as the paper once carried laws. When the list was read aloud, the chamber stood, not for theatrics, but because dignity asked for posture. And when the voice reached Sarah Crockett, it did not lean heavier than the rest. That was the point. Her name was honored in balance, destined never again to vanish into insult. And beyond Washington, memory rippled outward. Statues, modest in scale, began rising across states. Not generals on horses, not governors cast in bronze, women in work clothes, feet planted, shoulders forward, both hands gripping rope. Children traced inscriptions with fingers. Flag detail, 1976. Communities nodded at stone reminders that labor is heritage. Schools folded the story into curricula. Social studies teachers wrote new units. Day 1, context. Day 2, hidden contributions. Day 3, reflection and gratitude. Cafeterias posted signs. No job is menial, only contributions forgotten. Break rooms taped the phrase beside schedules. Churches folded it into sermons. Hold the rope became shorthand in workplaces, in police academies, in union halls. Part instruction, part prayer. A reminder that what matters most often depends on unseen hands refusing to let go. In less than a season, the photograph wasn't just remembered, it was practiced. What started as humiliation in a hearing had become a blueprint for national repair. The storm of cameras and applause had long passed, but something heavier lingered in the nation's air, gravity wrapped in memory. The final scene opened not with noise but with stillness. The hearing chamber reset under dimmed sconces, prepared for one last reckoning. Technicians leaned into their consoles. With a single keystroke, the giant screen flared again. Onto it bloomed the now famous black-and-white photograph. Sarah Crockett at the center of the rope line, knuckles swollen against the fury of the bicentennial wind. The flag bent like an ocean wave behind her, threatening to pull free, but her stance refused collapse. It was the same image the nation had stared at for weeks, but here, in this chamber, it glowed like the first time all over again. Then another tap summoned a live feed. Jasmine Crockett came into focus, upright, shoulders proud, her face bathed in the same white lights that had tested her resolve on that earlier day. The switchboard dissolved the two images, fusing them into one. Mother and daughter overlapped, hands on different ropes of the same thread, one posture passing seamlessly into the other. What was once past and present became indivisible. The chamber froze, as though even time itself had bowed its head. Jasmine didn't move, didn't speak. She let the image breathe, let the silence stretch. Movement, she knew, would be excess. Any sound beyond the image would clatter like clutter against something that required reverence. Above the chamber, an enormous American flag stirred on its indoor pole, catching the faint rotation of an overhead fan. The ripple coincided eerily with the photograph on screen, as if past and present coincided too, cloth and image saluting one another. The audience sat hushed, and the hush felt earned. It was not anticipation of drama to come, it was recognition. Into that quiet, Jasmine finally stepped forward. Her voice, soft but steady, cut through the hall, not like a performance, but like a commitment. The mother you insulted kept the American flag standing. Today, I do the same for the truth. The words settled like iron filings pulled by magnet, aligning everything in the space toward them. Nobody clapped. Nobody cheered. That was the genius of the moment. It did not need applause. Clapping would have felt like clutter against clarity. What remained instead was silence, heavy and clean, the sound of people seeing something larger than themselves. In homes across America, families rose quietly before their screens. Some whispered aloud the phrase already spreading from kitchen to lunchroom to picket line. Hold the rope. A grandfather in Milwaukee touched a newspaper clipping on his fridge and repeated, "That's how you stand." A nurse in El Paso printed the photograph small enough to fit behind her badge. A schoolboy in Baltimore copied the phrase on a notebook margin. Hold it together, then hold it higher. The symbol did not demand belief. It asked to be continued. And so the rope passed, mother to daughter, chamber to nation. From now on, the weight no longer belonged to one woman standing in the wind. It belonged to everyone who understood that things worth keeping are not things to be watched fall. The story closed not with spectacle, but with instruction. Hold it, keep it from falling, and when the wind comes, hold it higher.